In the heart of Jerusalem, where ancient stones whisper secrets older than time itself, flames erupt without spark or match every Easter Saturday. For over 12 centuries, the holy fire has descended into the tomb of Christ, defying every law of physics as it burns cool to the human touch for precisely 33 minutes, the exact years of Christ's life on earth. Scientists have probed its mysteries with instruments and theories. Skeptics have mocked it as an elaborate deception. Yet year after year, it manifests before thousands, a blaze that science cannot replicate or explain. What unseen power ignites this cool inferno in the very chamber where death was eternally defeated, challenging the boundaries between the natural world and the divine? The cobblestones of Jerusalem's old city gleamed slick and wet beneath the veil of pre-dawn darkness on Holy Saturday, 1579. Pilgrims from the far reaches of the Orthodox world had endured months of perilous travel, crossing seas roiled by storms, traversing bandit-haunted roads, and braving the uncertainties of foreign lands, all to converge here. Their breath hung like ethereal clouds in the crisp April air, each exhalation a silent prayer as they pressed inexorably toward the church of the Holy Sepulchre. In their hearts burned a desperate, unquenchable hope for a glimpse of the divine, a sign that heaven still reached down to touch the mortal realm. Among this sea of faithful walked Demetrius Palaiologos, a Byzantine scholar whose weathered hands gripped a leather-bound journal crammed with meticulous notes from 17 prior holy fire ceremonies. His dark eyes, etched with the shadows of endless theological debates and late-night ponderings, reflected the inner turmoil of a man perpetually suspended between unwavering faith and relentless reason. For 2 full decades, he had attended this sacred rite, chronicling every nuance, the timing of the flames' appearance, the quality of their light, the reactions of the crowd, in a quest for patterns that might bridge the chasm between his scholarly intellect and his fragile belief. Each entry in his journal was a step toward understanding, yet each year left him with more questions than answers. Another year, another veil of mystery, he murmured to his steadfast companion, Father Maximos, an elderly monk whose flowing white beard cascaded like spun silk over his somber black robes. The priest's eyes, undimmed by age, sparkled with a faith as pure and steady as a mountain spring, standing in sharp contrast to Demetrius's analytical reserve. "Mystery is the very language in which God speaks to us," Father Maximos replied, his voice infused with the gentle authority born of decades immersed in prayer and contemplation. "Perhaps your journals seek to decipher what was never intended for mortal minds to fully grasp, my friend." The massive wooden doors of the church groaned open with a deep, resonant timbre as the first faint rays of dawn brushed the golden dome overhead. Inside, the atmosphere hung heavy, saturated with the accumulated essence of centuries. Layers of incense smoke that clung to the air like sacred memories, mingled with the faint echo of innumerable prayers that had risen to these vaulted ceilings. Pilgrims surged through the entrance in a human tide, their footsteps reverberating against flagstones polished smooth by the passage of millions of devoted feet over the ages. Demetrius allowed himself to be carried along in the flow, his gaze fixed on the edicule ahead, the ornate marble structure enshrining the tomb of Christ at the church's sacred core. Its surface, darkened by the soot of countless candles and reverently touched by the lips of believers through the generations, exuded an aura of profound antiquity. Within its confines lay 2 intimate chambers: the Chapel of the Angel, where legend proclaimed an angelic messenger had first announced the resurrection, and beyond it, the Holy Sepulchre proper, a cramped space scarcely accommodating 3 kneeling figures, its very stones steeped in the miracle of eternity. As the hours unfolded, the church swelled beyond its limits, bodies pressing close in a tapestry of humanity. Orthodox patriarchs, resplendent in their golden vestments embroidered with symbols of divine glory, assumed their ceremonial positions encircling the tomb. Armenian, Coptic, and Syrian clergy joined them, upholding their time-honored privileges to bear witness. The air grew dense with mounting anticipation, interwoven with the heady aromas of frankincense, myrrh, and the raw scent of human devotion poured out in sweat and tears. Demetrius secured a position affording him clear views of both the tomb's entrance and the myriad expressions on the faces of the assembled faithful. His journal lay open on his lap, pen poised like a sentinel ready to capture every observable detail. Yet as he surveyed the crowd, mothers cradling ailing children in their arms, elderly pilgrims who had liquidated their life savings for this singular journey, young priests whose eyes burned with the fire of untested zeal, something unfamiliar stirred within his carefully maintained scholarly detachment. It was as if the collective yearning around him was seeping through the cracks in his armor, awakening echoes of his own long-suppressed longings. Close by stood Maria Komnenos, a widow hailing from the distant spires of Constantinople, her trembling hands clutching a bundle of 33 pristine white candles, one for each year of Christ's earthly sojourn. Her son, her last remaining anchor in a world that had stripped her of husband and daughters through plague and distance, now languished on the brink of death from a relentless fever that had confounded every healer. Her lips moved in ceaseless, silent invocation, her weathered features etched with the raw desperation of a mother facing unimaginable loss. "He was all I had left," she whispered to the empty air beside her, her voice a fragile thread barely rising above the murmur of surrounding prayers. "My husband fell to the plague's merciless grip. My daughters wed and scattered to far-off horizons. If God claims my son now—" The sentence dissolved into unspoken anguish, but Demetrius, overhearing, felt its completion like a dagger to his own concealed doubts. If God takes him, what foundation remains for faith in a seemingly indifferent cosmos? Her raw vulnerability sliced through Demetrius's academic veneer, resonating with the questions he had interred beneath layers of intellectual pursuit. How many times had he observed such scenes unfold? How many souls, teetering on the precipice of despair, had he catalogued from afar, their fervent hopes reduced to data points in his ledger, akin to a naturalist dispassionately noting the behaviors of distant wildlife? As the sun climbed toward its zenith and noon drew near, the ceremony commenced in solemn earnest. The Greek Orthodox Patriarch, arrayed in vestments of pristine white and gleaming gold that caught the light like captured sunlight, advanced toward the tomb accompanied by an Armenian bishop of equal dignity. In accordance with rituals etched into the annals of time, these representatives of ancient churches entered the Holy Sepulchre bearing nothing but the garments upon their backs. No flint, no tinder, no artifice of human ingenuity to kindle flame. The multitude pressed closer, voices uniting in ancient hymns that had resounded through these hallowed stones for more than a millennium. Father Maximos materialized at his elbow once more, his aged countenance radiating serenity amid the swelling chaos. "Feel it now, my friend," the monk whispered, his words cutting through the din like a calm breeze. The hunger permeating the air, not for sustenance of body, but for irrefutable proof that we do not wander this vast darkness in solitude. The Patriarch and the Armenian bishop disappeared into the tomb's shadowed interior, the small wooden door sealing behind them with a thud that reverberated like the closing of fate itself. Beyond its barrier, the waiting throng descended into a silence so absolute that Demetrius could discern the thunderous rhythm of his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. Thousands upon thousands stood united in breath and purpose, their collective vigil a living testament to humanity's enduring quest for divine affirmation. Minutes elongated into what felt like eternities. Demetrius's pen remained idle above the blank page of his journal, his habitual compulsion for documentation utterly forsaken. Instead, his attention fixed upon the tapestry of faces surrounding him. Maria's eyes brimming with desperate hope, Father Maximos's features suffused with unshakable conviction, and the familiar blend of skepticism tempered by yearning mirrored in fellow educated pilgrims like himself. What if, this year, the miracle failed to materialize? The notion crashed over him like a physical assault, unbidden and unrelenting. What would become of Maria's fragile faith, already strained to its limits? What of his own meticulously balanced worldview, which teetered on the fulcrum between rational inquiry and the acceptance of transcendent mystery? Deep within the tomb, concealed from the anxious gaze of the multitude, the Patriarch knelt upon the ancient stone slab where Christ's body had once rested in death's cold embrace. The surface beneath his knees bore the subtle indentations worn by centuries of reverent contact, each groove a silent chronicle of human yearning for communion with the eternal. The air in the confined chamber felt unnaturally dense, almost vibrant with latent energy, as though the molecules themselves paused in reverent anticipation. The Armenian bishop knelt beside him, their long-standing doctrinal divergences dissolved in this shared moment of profound vigil. Together, they intoned the invocations preserved through over 1,000 years, their voices mere whispers in the enveloping sacred gloom. "Lord Jesus Christ, who triumphed over death in this hallowed place," the Patriarch entreated, his words weighted with the gravity of unbroken tradition. "If it aligns with your divine will, dispatch your holy fire as a beacon to your devoted servants." The ensuing silence expanded beyond the confines of measurable time. In that profound darkness, encircled by stones that had borne witness to history's paramount miracle, The two men lingered in expectant waiting, for a response that held the power to reaffirm their convictions, or to dismantle the aspirations of the thousands beyond. Outside, the crowd's composure began to fray at its edges. Murmurs arose among the pilgrims, queries of delay, fears of mishap. Demetrius sensed his own unease mounting, his analytical faculties spinning through grim possibilities. Could the miracle be nothing more than a centuries-old ruse, perpetuated by clerical collusion? Might his exhaustive records amount to naught, but the annotation of an elaborate historical fraud? Even as these corrosive doubts besieged him, he discovered himself uttering a prayer, not the measured supplications of a seeker after knowledge, but the raw, urgent plea of a soul confronting the abyss of a universe devoid of purpose or light. The tomb's wooden door stood resolutely shut. The moment hung in limbo, poised between unwavering belief and crushing disillusionment, between radiant hope and profound despair. In this crucible of suspended time, the ultimate trial of faith was on the verge of revelation. What manner of divine fire, if any, would burst forth from the obscurity? The resolution lay concealed within the tomb where mortality had been vanquished, ready to either bathe the faithful in celestial light or consign them to the chill shadows of their own uncertainty. The obscurity within the tomb appeared to throb with an intrinsic cadence, as if the ancient stones retained a visceral memory of the instant when death was irrevocably overthrown within these confines. The patriarch's respiration had harmonized with that of the Armenian bishop at his side, forging a bond that surpassed the fractures of ecclesiastical history. The solitary oil lamp they had carried provided a feeble illumination, its flame casting capricious shadows that cavorted across the marble surfaces, each one polished to a sheen by the devoted caresses of pilgrims across eras. In this sanctified enclosure, the passage of time defied conventional measure. Moments dilated into prolonged intervals, while entire spans compressed into the space of a single pulse. The patriarch's knees protested against the unyielding stone, yet he held his posture with unyielding resolve, channeling his essence into the timeless prayer that had echoed in this spot for more than 12 centuries. His hands, seasoned by years of bestowing blessings and partaking in the sacred rite of breaking bread in Christ's memory, now quivered faintly, not from the frailties of advancing age or the chamber's chill, but from the immense burden of anticipation shouldered by the multitude awaiting beyond the tomb's barriers. "In your boundless mercy, O Lord," he murmured, his voice scarcely disrupting the hallowed hush, "permit your light to pierce this darkness, as it did upon the dawn of the third day." The Armenian bishop's reply came as a soft reverberation. "As you subdued death, so subdue the shadows of our doubt." Beyond the tomb's confines, the assembled crowd maintained a collective suspension of breath, the very atmosphere within the church seeming to halt in solidarity. Demetrius experienced his typically restless intellect subsiding, despite his attempts to cling to objective scrutiny. The journal clutched in his grasp remained untouched, its pages pristine as he surrendered to the enveloping, profound quiet that had descended upon the thousands. Maria Komnenos tightened her hold on her 33 candles, her knuckles blanching from the intensity, the wax yielding and warming beneath her fervent clasp. Surrounding her, fellow pilgrims brandished their own tapers, forming a vast woodland of white stems poised to erupt in flame, or to stand as stark emblems of petitions denied. "How much longer has it been?" inquired a youthful priest from the monastic heights of Mount Athos, his whisper barely piercing the veil of silence. Father Maximos, his eyelids sealed in contemplative prayer, responded without parting them. "In this realm, time holds no dominion. We abide not by the ticking of clocks, but by the eternal cadence of faith itself." The monk's utterance resonated with a profundity that Demetrius felt reverberate through his very core. Here, amid stones that had beheld the resurrection, mundane metrics proved inadequate. The academic within him yearned to consult his timepiece, to log the precise duration of the wait, yet a deeper impulse restrained him. For the first occasion in memory, he inhabited the present unadorned, balanced precariously between skepticism and surrender. Inside the tomb, an alteration commenced, subtle, almost imperceptible at its inception, akin to the faintest modulation in the texture of the gloom. The patriarch perceived it prior to visual confirmation, a warmth that emanated not from any tangible origin, but from the ambient air encircling them. The Armenian bishop's inhalations accelerated subtly, his invocations acquiring heightened fervor as he too detected the impending enigma. The oil lamp's flame, which had maintained a consistent burn throughout their watch, now cavorted with increased vigor, as though agitated by an intangible zephyr. The shadows adorning the walls undulated and swayed, forming configurations that appeared nearly animate in their fluidity. The chamber's temperature ascended noticeably, yet it was no stifling heat of confinement, but a distinctive essence, a warmth that infiltrated not merely the flesh but the spirit, instilling a tranquility that transcended rational comprehension. "Do you sense it?" the patriarch breathed, his tone laced with reverential astonishment. The bishop could only incline his head in affirmation, his vocal cords constricted by the enormity of the unfolding event. Throughout his extensive ministry, amid innumerable liturgies and observances, he had encountered nothing comparable to the palpable presence now saturating the diminutive space. It was as though the atmosphere had transmuted into something holy, imbued with a potency that rendered each breath an act of devotion. The warmth amplified, yet it imparted no unease. Rather, it enveloped them like a paternal embrace, suffusing them with a serenity beyond articulation. The patriarch's hands, previously unsteady under the yoke of anticipation, now stabilized as he attuned to the approach of a phenomenon defying human grasp. Then, in the interval spanning one heartbeat to the next, the miracle materialized. Illumination flourished amid the shadows, not the stark brilliance of artificial light, nor the constant radiance of conventional flame, but an entity wholly otherworldly. It seemed to emanate from the stones themselves, as if the marble had attained translucence, unveiling an inherent luminosity that had lain dormant, awaiting this precise juncture to reveal itself. The light possessed a blue-white hue, immaculate as pristine snow, yet infused with the warmth of midsummer rays. It flickered and pirouetted like fire, yet projected no umbre. It bathed every recess of the chamber, simultaneously rendering the surrounding darkness more profound and meaningful. This was illumination transcending the ordinary visual spectrum, perceptible not solely to the ocular faculties, but to the essence of the soul. The patriarch drew in a sharp breath, his theological erudition offering no schema for the spectacle before him. This surpassed metaphorical light of holy writ or symbolic glow of ritual. It was luminescence incarnate, celestial splendor assuming corporeal form amid matter and masonry. The Armenian bishop extended his hand tentatively, his fingers quivering as they neared the capering radiance. The light appeared to react, streaming toward his digits like fluids seeking equilibrium. Upon contact with his skin, he emitted a cry, not of agony, but of pure astonishment. The touch was cool, improbably so, reminiscent of caressing liquefied celestial glow. "The fire," the patriarch intoned in hushed awe, "the holy fire has descended." As though heeding his declaration, the light consolidated, amassing into discrete flames that hovered above the slab where Christ's form had once reposed. These were no commonplace blazes. They combusted sans fuel, sans warmth, sans devouring their medium, yet they exuded a reality surpassing any terrestrial conflagration. They moved with deliberate intent, extending toward the candles the duo had borne into the sanctum. With trembling grasp, the patriarch elevated his cluster of 33 candles. As the enigmatic flames brushed the wicks, ignition occurred instantaneously, yet the resultant fire diverged from any he had beheld. It oscillated and leaped like standard blaze, but placing his palm directly within yielded only a mild coolness, akin to fingering dawn mist. The Armenian bishop emulated the gesture, kindling his candles from the miraculous sources. The illumination now pervading the tomb blended the mundane and the transcendent, mortal fire endowed with celestial attributes. For precisely 33 minutes, the duration of Christ's terrestrial existence, these flames would remain temperate to touch, flouting every precept of physics and chemistry known to humankind. Beyond the tomb, the throng intuited the shift prior to ocular verification. A unified inhalation swept through the pilgrims as an almost tangible charge of expectancy electrified the atmosphere. The fabric of reality itself appeared to soften, becoming more receptive to heavenly intrusion. Demetrius's pulse thundered, his ingrained skepticism clashing with a more primordial impulse. The journal in his possession suddenly seemed trivial, his accumulated annotations mere superficial marks in the face of the imminent revelation. The tomb's wooden portal commenced its opening. Radiance cascaded forth, not the abrasive glare of lamps or the uniform sheen of oil, but a vitality possessing its own volition and purpose. The patriarch emerged foremost, his visage aglow with transcendent marvel, his hands uplifting candles aflame with fires alien to earthly norms. The assembly detonated in a cacophony that fused jubilation, supplication, and primal acknowledgement. "Christos anesti," resounded in Greek. "Christ is risen." The affirmation cascaded through the ancient edifice in a multitude of tongues as pilgrims from the Orthodox diaspora proclaimed their conviction in the unfolding wonder. Yet it was not merely the visual spectacle of the flames that stirred them. It was the intrinsic nature of the light, which seemed to infiltrate not only the church's obscurity, but the hidden recesses of human spirits. Demetrius discovered tears tracing paths down his cheeks, though he could not articulate their origin. His inquisitive intellect, honed over decades of classification and interrogation, fell mute before the enigma materializing in his presence. Maria Komnenos surged ahead with the multitude, her 33 candles extended aloft. When the patriarch's flame met her wicks, they kindled with identical temperate fire, eliciting a gasp from her lips at the sensation. The blaze now cavorting upon her candles appeared warm in visage, but cool in contact, as if natural ordinances had been temporarily abrogated in homage to a superior authority. "For my son," she breathed, her utterance engulfed by the surrounding exultation. "Let this light extend across the miles to touch my son." The fire propagated through the congregation with preternatural velocity. Candle upon candle ignited as devotees brushed wicks against neighbors' flames. Yet regardless of the multiplicity of ignitions, the primal fires never waned. It was as if the blaze self-replicated infinitely, each nascent flame as flawless and enigmatic as its progenitor. Demetrius became ensnared in the flow, his own candle mysteriously in hand, though recollection of its retrieval eluded him. Upon ignition, a jolt of epiphany coursed through him, as though a latent facet of his soul had abruptly roused. The temperate fire danced before his gaze, and within its core, he discerned not resolutions to his inquiries, but a treasure far more invaluable. The insight that certain enigmas were destined for immersion rather than dissection. Father Maximos reappeared at his flank, his candle ablaze with the sacred fire, his venerable features transfigured by ecstasy. "Do you comprehend it now, my friend?" the monk inquired, his voice scarcely audible amid the revelry. Certain verities evade inscription in ledgers. They demand to be embodied, to be breathed. The fire persisted in its dissemination, coursing through the church like a torrent of luminescence. Pilgrims who had traversed vast distances to partake in this instant found their devotion recompensed beyond their most audacious aspirations. The flames gracing their candles transcended mere emblems. They constituted palpable evidence that the divine persisted in its interventions within the mortal sphere, that the veil separating paradise and terra firma remained traversable for the faithful. Nevertheless, even as the jubilation crested, Demetrius's observant nature stirred anew. He retrieved his pocket watch, marking the chronology with the accuracy ingrained from years of scrutiny. If the venerable chronicles held true, these flames would retain their cool demeanor for exactly 33 minutes. No extension, no abbreviation. The inexorable countdown had initiated. In 33 minutes, the ethereal fire would metamorphose into a commonplace blaze, scorching to flesh, explicable by empirical means. But in this interlude bridging the ordinary and the extraordinary, myriad pilgrims clasped fragments of the celestial made tangible. What fate awaited when those 33 minutes elapsed? Would conviction withstand the reversion to mundane fire? Or would skepticism insinuate itself back into spirits that had been graced by wonder? The response resided within the flickering flames themselves, temperate to contact yet ablaze with stellar fervor, harboring both the assurance of divinity and the delicacy of mortal credence. The miracle had ignited, but its authentic crucible lay ahead. The expanse of flames, now engulfing the church of the Holy Sepulchre, forged a vista that eluded both articulation and apprehension. Thousands of candles blazed with the arcane blue-white fire, their radiance capering across time-worn stone walls and illuminating countenances altered by profound astonishment. The atmosphere itself appeared to glimmer with celestial essence, as if the demarcation between terrestrial and ethereal domains had attenuated to the fragility of silk. Demetrius navigated the throng in a trance-like state, his pocket watch secured in one palm, his illuminated candle in the other. 28 minutes had transpired since the fire's emergence from the tomb. Merely 5 remained before the anticipated transmutation, as per every testimony he had chronicled across 2 decades. He observed the surrounding visages with renewed perception. These expressions belonged not to spectators of a cunning illusion or participants in ornate pageantry, but to souls intimately encountered by the divine, effulgent with a delight emanating from profound reservoirs of belief. Maria Komnenos lingered nearby, lacrimation coursing down her etched cheeks as she elevated her 33 candles, each flame pirouetting with the same improbable coolness. "I can perceive it," she confided to the ether, her tones saturated with veneration. "I sense the essence of the risen Christ within these flames." Father Maximos had stationed himself adjacent to one of the church's venerable columns, his candle maintained steadfast amid the encircling press. His eyes remained sealed, lips articulating mute orisons, yet his countenance exhibited a tranquillity so deep that Demetrius felt his own turbulent spirit assuaging merely through beholding the monk's composure. The erudite facet of Demetrius itched to perform essays, to gauge the flame's thermal properties with apparatuses, to chronicle every facet of the occurrence with scientific rigor. Yet a more profound impulse restrained him. For the inaugural instance in his maturity, he discovered contentment in merely partaking of the enigma without the compulsion to anatomize it. A youthful priest from the Russian expanses positioned near the tomb's portal, his candle's glow mirrored in his dilated pupils. He had journeyed for months to attain this juncture, expending his accumulated wealth and weathering innumerable tribulations en route. Now, as the temperate fire cavorted before him, he grasped that no volume of doctrinal scholarship could have equipped him for the tangibility of divine manifestation. "Father," he murmured to a senior cleric proximate, "how do we revert to quotidian existence after beholding this?" The elder priest, whose grasp quivered as he sustained his candle, retorted with sagacity forged from decades in divine service. "We do not revert, my son. We transport this luminescence inwardly, and it alchemizes every aspect we encounter." As the minutes inexorably advanced, Demetrius discerned a remarkable phenomenon unfolding amid the assembly. Pilgrims transcended mere possession of their candles. They disseminated them. Mothers hoisted their offspring to afford the young a proximate view of the miraculous blazes. Aged devotees, some scarcely capable of upright posture, received support from youthful adherents, ensuring their full immersion in the wonder. Strangers clasped one another, their variances in origin and dialect dissolved in the universal vernacular of all. In the Armenian precinct of the church, an antiquated patriarch, his digits contorted by arthritis, sustained his candle with astonishing firmness. His eyes, obscured by cataracts, appeared to discern the flames with unerring clarity. When a youthful Armenian woman drew near, aspiring to kindle her candle from his, he proffered a smile imbued with the tenderness of a lifetime devoted to the sacred. "Grandmother," she addressed him in Armenian, employing the honorific for an elder, "may I partake of your light?" "Child," he responded, his timbre bearing the gravitas of eras, "this light pertains to us all. It is the luminescence of the resurrection, and it acknowledges no confines." As their candles converged, the flame transferred between them with unaltered enigmatic coolness, and both experienced a linkage surpassing the corporeal act of sharing fire. It was as though they engaged in a sacrament extending retrograde through centuries, uniting them to every adherent who had ever beheld this miracle. Demetrius consulted his watch anew. 31 minutes. 2 persisted before the shift. He pondered whether this annum might deviate, if the miracle could prolong beyond customary limits. Yet even as the notion traversed his consciousness, he recognized its irrelevance. Whether the flames endured temperate for 33 minutes or 33 epochs, the veracity he had observed would persist unaltered. The multitude appeared to intuit the impending transition. A delicate alteration in vitality undulated through the thousands, as if an innate collective awareness alerted them to the miracle's waning. Far from diminishing their elation, this cognizance amplified it. They elevated their candles loftier, their invocations intensified in ardor, and their visages radiated an intrinsic light rivaling the flames they bore. Maria Komnenos succumbed to an abrupt impulse to essay the flames once more. She positioned her palm directly above one of her candles, experiencing the implausible coolness that contravened every natural precept she comprehended. In that contact, she discerned not merely the lack of heat, but the manifestation of something immeasurably vaster, a compassion that had vanquished mortality, a might capable of spanning epochs to solace a bereaved mother's soul. "For my son," she reiterated, yet this instance, the words bore a transformed essence. No longer a frantic entreaty, they had evolved into an affirmation of belief, a proclamation that the light she clasped was intrinsically linked to the restoration her child required. Father Maximos unsealed his eyes and fixed them upon Demetrius. The monk's regard harbored a profundity of comprehension that seemed to breach the scholar's fortified barriers. Wordlessly, he conveyed a truth Demetrius had evaded for decades. Certain realities demanded apprehension via faith, not intellect. 32 minutes. The patriarch, still resplendent with the awe of his tomb encounter, traversed the crowd bearing his inaugural bundle of candles. Each flame perpetuated its arcane qualities, temperate to touch yet effulgent with heavenly luminescence. As he progressed, pilgrims extended hands to graze his raiment, craving some tangible nexus to the miracle he had directly observed. "Tell us, Your Holiness," entreated a pilgrim from Grecian shores, "what visions unfolded in the tomb? What sensations enveloped you?" The patriarch halted, his eyes mirroring the encircling dances of fire. "I beheld light," he articulated with unadorned profundity, "but not as mortals conceive it. I witnessed the light predating the sun's genesis, the light destined to endure when all celestial bodies extinguish. I experienced the presence of he who declared, 'I am the light of the world,' and I comprehended those words as unvarnished verity, not allegory." His testimony propagated a wave of reverence among those within earshot. Here stood an erudite figure, schooled in premier theological institutions, recounting divine communion with the ingenuousness of youth. His utterances bore the imprimatur of first-hand encounter, the substance of witnessed truth over mere erudition. 33 minutes. The metamorphosis initiated with subtlety, nearly undetectable. The flames that had maintained coolness for the precise duration of Christ's mortal tenure began to acquire warmth. The alteration progressed incrementally, a marginal elevation in temperature prompting pilgrims to instinctively recalibrate their holds on their candles. Within instants, the celestial fire had reverted to terrestrial blaze, scorching enough to sear skin and liquefy wax as any conventional flame. A unified gasp ascended from the assembly as thousands concurrently registered the shift. Palms that had boldly embraced flames now retracted by reflex as the fire reclaimed its inherent traits. The miracle had concluded, yet its resonance persisted, vibrating through every spirit in attendance. Demetrius perceived the escalating heat from his candle and promptly adjusted his clasp, but his focus lingered on the flame proper. Though it now conformed to ordinary attributes, it appeared to him that a vestige of the divine radiance endured, a subtle quality distinguishing it from any prior fire he had encountered. Perhaps, he mused, the miracle resided not solely in the flame's coolness, but in their genesis, in the emergence of light from void in the locus where death had yielded. Maria Komnenos meticulously quenched all but one of her 33 candles, safeguarding the remainder for transport to her ailing progeny. The surviving flame now burned with heat, yet she sustained it with unwavering hands, her conviction unshaken by the restoration of natural decree. If anything, the transition had fortified her belief. The deity capable of suspending physical laws for 33 minutes possessed assuredly the potency to mend a fevered youth. Across the church, pilgrims embarked on the deliberate endeavor of conserving their flames for the odyssey homeward. Some had prepared specialized lanterns to shield the fire during transit. Others would relay the flame to kin and comrades, forging an uninterrupted continuum of light disseminating throughout the Orthodox domain. By dusk, the holy fire would illuminate sanctuaries from Russia's frozen tundras to Ethiopia's sun-baked plains, from Greece's olive groves to Romania's mist-shrouded mountains, bearing the vow that the divine remained vibrant in the cosmos. Father Maximos drew near to Demetrius, his candle now exhibiting commonplace warmth, but extraordinary import. "Well, my friend," the monk intoned with a tender smile, "what inscription shall grace your journal for this day?" Demetrius gazed upon the vacant page that had endured untouched through the entirety of the rite. For 20 years, he had populated analogous folios with precise notations, quantifications, and hypotheses. But today, confronted with an enigma transcending ledger, he found himself bereft of expression. "I am uncertain," he conceded, his voice a murmur amid the lingering festivity. "How does one chronicle the ineffable? How to quantify the boundless?" The monk nodded in empathetic accord. "Perhaps the most authentic notation would be the most unadorned. Today I bore witness to a miracle, and it has reforged me." As the throng commenced its dispersal, conveying their flames into Jerusalem's thoroughfares and thence to the wider world, Demetrius tarried within the church, contemplating his pristine journal leaf. Encompassing him, the venerable stones seemed to hum with lingering vitality from the witnessed prodigy. The air retained a subtle aroma of the enigmatic fire, a bouquet dissimilar to any mortal blaze. At length, he elevated his pen and inscribed a solitary line. "Certain truths exceed verbal confines, surpass analytical grasp. Today I discerned that faith constitutes not the void of inquiries, but the embrace of wonder." He sealed the journal and directed his gaze upward to the dome, where accumulations of candle soot had etched patterns evocative of script. The amalgamated supplications of millions inscribed in ebony and shade. For the first time in decades, he embraced serenity amid enigma, satisfied to permit certain queries to linger unresolved. Candle in grasp, now aflame with what had once been miraculous fire, he proceeded toward the church's egress, bearing not merely illumination, but profound metamorphosis. In his wake, the tomb stood vacant anew, its marble expanses devoid of any remnant of the occurred wonder. Yet the ramifications of those 33 minutes would propagate outward through temporal and spatial dimensions, influencing existences in manners both manifest and concealed, conveying the assurance that in a realm frequently cloaked in obscurity, celestial light retained the capacity to penetrate. The miracle narratives of 2025 would encompass this day, when thousands beheld the inconceivable and disseminated its luminescence into a sphere ravenous for optimism. The valiant deeds of faith enacted by pilgrims, who had surmounted insurmountable distances, weathered innumerable adversities, and wagered all for a fleeting encounter with the divine, would galvanize forthcoming generations. What additional miracles lurked in the sanctified locales of the globe? What further instances of heavenly intercession concealed themselves in history's shadows, awaiting those with perceptive vision and receptive spirits? The holy fire had resolved some enigmas while engendering innumerable others, but perchance that embodied the essence of authentic miracle, not to furnish facile resolutions, but to deepen the profundity of faith's enigma. As the final pilgrims departed, and the church subsided into its primordial quiescence, the stones themselves appeared to murmur of impending marvels, of divine luminescence that would persist in piercing the gloom so long as human souls yearned for union with the infinite. The miracle had terminated, but its reverberation would echo eternally, a monument to faith's indomitable might and the actuality of divine affection rendered tangible in a world profoundly necessitating both.